So my journey actually started with a light bulb moment. When I was in design school, I was actually very frustrated about design and the profession of design. It just didn't make sense to me that every single time that we created something and you put your heart and soul into a new product and a new design, and you work till the deadline and you launch the product, and then you kind of throw it over the fence, and your user will use the product itself, and they probably experience a lot of joy out of it if you're a good designer. But what happens after that was often not taken into account. And that just didn't make sense to me. So instead of, because I basically had two options, either you quit what you do, or you try to change it. And instead of quitting design school at that stage, I started learning about design for sustainability, which was also quite kind of a frustrating journey, because what you then find is that quite often the products that you then design are very efficient. So they might use less energy or less material or less, if you throw them away at the end of their life, it maybe is less plastic that is being incinerated. But it was still something, there was still some negative impact that you create by the act of designing, which I felt super uncomfortable with. And quite soon after I started exploring design for sustainability, I came across the concept of a circular economy. And in a circular economy, waste is design gone wrong. And that just resonated with me. In a circular economy, you design for an economy that actually values the resources that you extract out of the ground, and it values it so it's also accessible for future generations. And quite soon after I learned about this, I created my first design, which is, as in the picture, a bicycle lamp. So I studied in the Netherlands, and as you probably all know, we love cycling, also at night when it's dark. And especially students, they buy like these throwaway bicycle lamps, like these small things, so they won't get a fine, and they're quite cheap. And they created a lot of waste, so I wanted to see how to address that issue by creating something that was much better and had positive impact only. So we created a product service system in which you don't buy the lamp itself, but you buy the light. So you go to a vending machine and you get one of these bicycle lamps, and when it runs out of battery, you bring it back to the vending machine and you pay to charge it, so you get a new lamp. And in the vending machine itself, it's being charged, so they will maintain in the loop, and you can reuse them throughout their lifespan. And the company stays the owner of the lamp itself, so you can make sure that all the parts and all the components, and if the bicycle lamp is beaten up, you can just bring it back and make sure it's recycled. It was actually a lower price than a disposable bicycle lamp. So this type of thinking made so much more sense to me. It's really a mindset shift from less bad and less impact, what I typically found at that efficiency thinking, towards 100% good, and designing for a system in which it just makes sense. And I continued my journey, so I graduated from my design school, and I went on my journey, and I continued to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is a think tank in the UK, but we're a global think tank. And it's like a charity, non-profit organization that looks at the economy and how we use resources. And we developed this framework for a circular economy. And basically, what that describes is something very fundamentally different from that efficiency thinking. So this is our logo. And you see the three rings. So the inner ring symbolizes the economy. The middle ring symbolizes society, and the outer ring symbolizes the environment. And in a circular economy, for a circular economy, we develop products, services, and systems that basically make sense, that have positive spin-offs on the economy, on society, and the environment. And those are all enabled by new technologies, which don't have to be high-tech, but new types of innovations that create possibilities that we didn't have before. And typically, what we saw with sustainability is that it usually puts restrictions on society and the economy, and this actually opened up an entire space of creativity and new possibilities, because whatever you design should make sense on all these three levels. So basically, a circular economy is led by business. It's not just about recycling only. It's regenerative by design, and it's really an umbrella concept for many schools of thought, like maybe some of you have heard of Cradle to Cradle. And it's about doing good, not just less bad. And I like the quote from, it's the author from the book Cradle to Cradle, and he says, you know, that the difference between efficiency and effectiveness, or doing 100% good, is like, you know, if you do something bad, like beating your child, then doing less bad is like beating your child less. But you're still doing something fundamentally bad. You should stop doing that and do something nice, or give it a hug. So that's how he described that fundamental difference. And it's to create a counter-alternative for the linear economy. So the linear economy, and that's kind of how we describe the current economy that we're in, is like currently in a state of system failure. And it goes wrong in many parts of the entire system. So if you look at food waste, 69% of the food that we create is consumed. 11% is consumer waste, and 20% is value chain waste. So the waste is created at multiple places in the entire system. And also, if you look at the typical European car, it is parked 92% of the time. And it has 5 seats, but on average, only 1.5 seat is being used. So if we then talk about all these electric cars and Teslas, like, we also need to look at the number of that car is actually not moving 92% of the time. So from linear to circular, from a take, make, waste economy in which we take resources out of the ground, we make them into products, or they support services and systems, and then after that we waste them. Instead of that, we want to create a restorative and regenerative economy. So what does that mean? This is the Ellen MacArthur Foundation butterfly diagram, inspired by many schools of thought. But what you see here is that on the one hand, on this side, you see a biological cycle in which we cycle biological materials. For example, coffee ground. So you have, at the top, you will have the beans, and they're being processed, and eventually you have a nice cup of coffee. After you have that cup of coffee, you can actually use that coffee ground to, you know, cascade it and use it for another purpose, such as fertilizer for mushrooms. So that is cascading. And if there is no more value to take out of that biological material, we bring it back into the soil, and it's going to be regenerated there. On the other hand, you have the technological side of the circular economy, in which you have your metals, your plastics. So here you want to keep products, components, and materials at highest value at all times. And that first happens by, you know, making sure you use the product for longer, because that has the highest integrity of everything. Like, you have the most embedded energy in the product itself. And then it's about reusing components and materials, which can be done through repairing and through refurbishment, remanufacturing, and eventually recycling. This is all very much driven by design. Basically, this cannot happen without changing the way how we design things. And that's why circular design, which is basically design for a circular economy, plays such a big role in this framework. And surface design is a huge part of that, of course. If you look at that shift from products to services, and that you don't use or that you don't sell materials, but the value of materials itself. So what it means for design is that we move from tangible objects to the value of those, and that this happens in a system which is much larger than just one user in isolation. It's for an entire web of people that are all interconnected, and there can be also a lot of efficiency that can happen in that big network of people, which we should celebrate. To help you guys out, we have some ideas to implement to get you going with the concept of circular design. And the first one is about using compatible materials. This is a really fundamental idea to circular design. So basically, what we just discussed was the technological cycle and the biological cycle. And you typically want to make sure that these nutrients are not contaminated with each other. So, for example, a leather belt. Leather is a biological material coming from the skin of an animal, so these should come back to the soil rather than being restored as a technological material. But often with leather belts, you have like coatings and things that they put on there to make sure it's longer lasting and it's shiny and maybe in a specific color, which is typically a technological material, quite synthetic. If you put these two together, you cannot really separate them. So you cannot really restore the technological materials. You cannot really bring back the biological materials. So that's something that you want to avoid. But if you look at, for example, food packaging, where you have some food, which is organic or biological, in plastic, you eat the food and you are left with the plastic, so that typically doesn't contaminate each other. You just want to make sure you can take it apart afterwards. And these compatible materials should exist in a system in which they will come back to, to part in that infrastructure where they can be restored in some sort of way. That can be through refurbishment, can be through recycling, and if it's a biological material, through bringing that back into the place where it can be useful in soil again. An example of this is, and I really like this example actually, it's the Herman Miller Mira chair. So this is a chair that you use in an office space, and you can actually disassemble this chair in 15 minutes without damaging any of the parts. You can also put it back together really quickly. So you can replace parts that, look like they've been, used. For example, cushions at the arms. You can replace all of that when you want to reuse it again, and it's basically like new. All these parts can be taken off and onto the product again, and if they are at the end of their life, they can be fully recycled. They also ensured that there was safe chemistry in this specific product, so all the chemicals that exist in, for example, the plastic and the metal are safe to recycle and are not a damage for humans and the environment. So the second idea is probably something that you all are quite comfortable with. It's about shaping creatively to meet the needs. So this is really about that holistic picture of design. It's about making sure that if you have all these building blocks from your design, that they can transform over time and that you can respond to the unique needs of that moment and that specific user group. And that you can be quite modular in that, so that it doesn't become obsolete when user needs change. And then the third idea is about embedding intelligence. And I know you just had a talk about robots and everything, which is very exciting and is definitely a huge enabler. But there are also other types of technologies that are such a big enabler for making sure that materials stay in the loop. For example, you have the watermarking of plastics, so wherever your plastic ends up, you know exactly what the specific composition is of each plastic that you use. And this goes beyond just saying like, oh, this is PP or PET. This is also specifically about knowing what kind of chemicals you use in that plastic, so you can feed those back into the system and know exactly what you use, and also that you don't contaminate the entire material stream. Another idea in this space is also the materials passports for built environment. So basically, if you create a building and it stays there for like 20, 50 years, it's super useful if you want to demolish it after a certain time, that you know exactly what is in the building and also what the after-use scenario is. And the fourth one is design with the context in mind. And this is basically also about that we don't only look at the user as a consumer, but as a human again. A fun anecdote is from Henry Ford in 1914. He actually decided to double the wages of everybody in the production, of all the production staff. And that was ridiculous in that time. But through doing that, he enabled all his employees to actually buy a car themselves. So he generated a great amount of profit in that time. And that's because he didn't see them just as production staff. He saw them as human beings that also wanted to drive to work or wanted to go for a drive in the weekend. He helped 15 million Americans behind the steering wheel with this approach. So he really looked at the context of his decisions. And we should definitely look at the context of our designs. In what kind of society does it end up? What are the consequences for the economy? And also, what are the consequences for the environment? A couple of companies have already applied this type of thinking, and there are so many great case studies, but I will highlight three which have key distinctions between each other. So the first case study is from a company that is based in Singapore. It's called, and I'm probably pronouncing the name wrong, but it's called Care. And they actually offer air conditioning as a service. And what they do is they keep the integrity of the product itself, the air conditioning, and they make sure that their customers can pay as they go. So if they use the air conditioning system, then they only pay. What they can offer is a really high efficiency air conditioning because the user doesn't own the aircon. They just use it for now. So they can make sure that upgrades are being made and the optimal user experience is being created through creating a modular design and upgrading that. They also use data to make sure that if they need to do preventive maintenance, which also saves costs, they do so. And that's also how they can give a guarantee that their air conditioning systems are working. And especially for their market, that's really important. So the second one, and I love this example, this is Mud Jeans, lease a jeans. Some people are a bit uncomfortable with the idea in the beginning, but basically what they do is they lease out a jeans, and they, when you're done wearing the jeans or they're a bit worn out, you give them back to Mud Jeans, and they use the fiber again for their next generation of jeans. So they don't keep the integrity of the product, but they created the entire line of jeans that they lease out to come back and be recycled again after use. And then the third one is from Fat Llama. I like their tagline. So what they say is, borrow the stuff that you need and lend the stuff that you don't, which makes a lot of sense. This is matchmaking supply and demand. And this is another way to approach servitization for a circular economy, is basically connecting these dots in the system that haven't been connected before. And you can create a huge efficiency, and you can utilize already existing assets much better when people actually know that they can get something from their neighbor, or they can just use it for a day instead of buying one themselves. So to help you out with your, hopefully not first circular economy steps, but maybe they are your first tryouts with a circular product design, we created, in collaboration with IDEO, the Circular Design Guide. You can access it through circulardesignguide.com. And it's basically a tool to support you. So there are case studies, there's an introduction, there is a video, really good video from Tim Brown. There are 24 introductory methods, and we just launched a line of 4 new advanced methods. There are videos, resources, workshops, everything that you wish to get going with this new idea. So we just launched, together with Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute, 4 new methods on safe chemistry for circular product design and making safe and circular material choices. So they're on there also. The author of Cradle to Cradle once said, "Design is the first signal of human intention." And I do really feel like the circular economy and all the concepts related to the circular economy really ask one big question to design, and that is, what is your intention? What would you like to change on the economy, the society, and the environment? And what is truly your impact in that global and big complex system? It's not just about the use phase and what the user wants, but it's also about zooming out and looking at the bigger picture. So hopefully this gets you going, and if you have any questions, you can also tweet #circulardesign, and there are many people to help out with your questions. Thank you for today.